Greetings, guys. Hello. Our Lord and Savior from the regressive left, Jordan Peterson.
You're good. Yeah, you got it. Damn, you know how to keep it in. That's Amanda's ways. Well done. I would clap, but this thing
Recently appeared in a place where he has very frequently cited, and that is Scandinavia. He was recently on a TV show called Skavlan, basically where he appeared with a politician, an author, and the TV show host. Let's dive right into it, shall we?
That the best way to characterize Western society is as a tyrannical patriarchy, which is a appalling doctrine as far as I'm concerned.
How come is that?
So it's not tyrannical, that's the first thing.
We've only just begun, but look at her face. I mean, look at that little eye flutter.
So it's not tyrannical, that's the first thing.
So what she's making that face at is him saying that our Western society at large is not tyrannical. It's not a tyrannical patriarchy. So let's just quickly observe the definition of tyranny. So tyranny can be defined as cruel and oppressive government rule, a nation under cruel and oppressive government, cruel, unreasonable, or arbitrary use of power. So in the context of women and men and patriarchy, to say that women live under a patriarchal tyranny is absurd. I beg any woman in any Western society to name one rule of government, one rule of law, which is unreasonable or cruel towards them specifically because they're women. There's no tyranny upon me. So for her to make that little, like whatever that little eye roll was, okay, let's continue.
Certainly not compared to any other governmental form that currently exists and has ever existed. And it's not essentially patriarchal unless you believe that women haven't contributed in immense part to the construction of what we have now. So, and I also don't believe that to the degree that it is patriarchal, that its structure is dependent on the expression of power, arbitrary power on the part of men. I think that happens sometimes, but only when things go wrong.
What you're doing and doing now as well is challenging the idea of gender equality that is very important in Scandinavia. I think it's as you probably know. Why do you think that can be a problem? The idea of gender equality.
So basically, all that Peterson just said is that Western societies, Scandinavia included, do not live in oppressive patriarchal tyrannies. It's just not something that currently exists. And the interviewer's response to that is, okay, you are explicitly challenging gender equality. So essentially, that means that in this person's mind, to challenge the idea that we live in a tyrannical patriarchy, to challenge that notion, is to challenge gender equality itself. That is to say that we don't live in a patriarchal tyranny is to challenge the idea that men and women are of equal value in society. That does not make sense. That does not make sense at all. I don't understand how one derives that question from what he just said. Let's see how the man responds to this, shall we?
I don't think that equality of opportunity is a problem. I think that's a great thing, and that anyone with any sense champions equality of opportunity. I mean, even if you're purely selfish, say, and purely self-centered, you'd want to set up an economy where everyone who had ability could be maximally exploited by everyone else, because then we can all benefit from each other's talents. And so equality of opportunity is an absolutely useful fundamental principle.
So where's
but
the
that has
problem?
nothing to do with equality of outcome. Those things aren't even in the same conceptual universe. And to strive for equality of outcome is, well, it's a fool's game and likely to be it has proved to be in the past, extraordinarily dangerous, as well as impossible.
So there you have it. For possibly the 1000th time, Jordan Peterson has repeated what he says everywhere, which shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who interviews him, that he is for equality of opportunity, which is his idea of gender equality, I think we can assume. That is, for everyone to have the same opportunities, to be able to do the same things without any oppressive or tyrannical rule upon them. However, what he's not for is the idea that everyone, both genders, should be distributed equally in every single field. What he's saying is that is unrealistic. And now, for the 1,000th time, let us hear why.
I mean, one of the things we know, for example, is that, I don't know to what degree it's common knowledge in Scandinavia, but the biggest differences between men and women in the world in terms of temperament and interest are in Scandinavia, and they've maximized as a consequence of your egalitarian policies.
What do you mean by that?
It means that the more egalitarian your state, the bigger the personality differences between men and women. That's like
How do you measure that? How do you know that?
Oh, well, psychologists have perfected, at least to some degree, the measure of personality over the last 30 years with very advanced statistical models. And so what you do is you offer men and women well-validated tests of preference and of personality. And you do that all across the world with tens of thousands of people in multi-country samples. And then you look at the difference between men and women. And then you rank order that by wealth and egalitarian social policy. And what you find is the more egalitarian the society, the more different the men and women become.
Or a simpler way to put that you could also make that determination from, would be to look at different societies, different cultures in the West, or different nations, look at their policies, their politics, how egalitarian they are, and then, well, also the duration for how long they've been that way. And then, for example, look at the occupations in that nation. Look at the gender averages within each occupation. By doing that, what Peterson is saying is that you can clearly see that there is not an equal distribution in every field. Women tend one way, men tend another way. The interviewer is now going to ask our eye roller what she thinks of this. So keep in mind everything we've just talked about, everything Peterson's just said. His point is that equality of opportunity, great thing. Equality of outcome, impossible. And he's about to ask this woman to respond to that, to what Peterson's just said.
Is this something you can recognize, or is it?
I would say, for me, it's quite a simple question, actually. Do we want that our sons and daughters should have the same opportunities and the same dreams or hopes for the good thing, or no? And for me, it's simple to answer that. It's yes, of course. So for me, equality and gender equality is very, very important. For me, also when we talk about gender equality, it's important for me to learn my daughter that her mom can lead and show the way, and her dad can hug and kiss her and show feelings. And I think that's something very important for the hoods where kids grow up, to show feelings, to have these gender equality discussions, to show her a way of opportunities and to strive forward. And it's important both for lonely men, lonely young men, but also for women that feel this roof of glass. They need to fight and to struggle the roof of glass to be successful in their lives.
What he just asked her to comment on, what he just asked her to respond to and saying, is this something you can recognize, is what do you think about what Peterson just said about the fact that empirical studies bear out that egalitarian nations do not, despite their egalitarian policies, have genders end up with equal outcomes. That is, in such nations, differences between genders tend to maximize rather than minimize, despite people's ability to freely choose. That is to say, men and women on average appear to have different interests, and therefore to force equality of outcome doesn't make any sense. It's unreasonable. It's impossible. That's what he's asked her to comment on. And instead, her response is just like she was going like this, it's just right over her head, at least from my perspective. It's like what she's saying is just a bunch of platitudes. What she's saying is, Well, let's just disregard all of that. We want boys to have feelings and we want girls to feel like they can be CEOs because there's a glass ceiling and that's the way it is. And the other thing she says too, she's like, gender equality is very, very important. So she doesn't make any real distinction between equality of opportunity and equality of outcome. She just says equality, like staying with the point that Peterson has just essentially debunked. She's like, it's very important. These are my feelings. Listen to me. If we want to be charitable, we could of course say yes. What she's saying, nothing wrong with some of these things. We should have women feel like they can do anything, and we should have boys feel like they can do anything, and that should be the world. But nobody's disputing that. That's not the issue at hand whatsoever. It's just like keeping the conversation at a very topical, superficial level. And I guess since this woman is a politician, maybe that's just what she's good at, what politicians are good at.
Do you agree on this?
I think that equality of opportunity is a perfectly reasonable proposition. I mean, I have a daughter and a wife. I do everything and many, many female clients and who I've consulted with and helped, and in many cases helped accelerate the development of their career tremendously. It's obviously of great utility to encourage forward striving in young people and people in general. That's not the issue in the least. The issue is the outcome.
Yeah, well, then why do you think the outcome, and these countries where the outcome is more equal, why do you think that leads to bigger differences between the sexes?
Because there's only two reasons that men and women differ. One is cultural, and the other is biological. And if you minimize the cultural differences, you maximize the biological differences. So I know everyone's shocked when they hear this. This isn't shocking news.
So there's his position right there. Just, put out there so straightforwardly. It's common sense. When you minimize the cultural differences of a nation, you therefore have the grounding or have the proper environment for the biological differences to emerge, if they may be. And relative to his points before, is that yes, in these egalitarian places, that seems to be the average case. Not the case for everyone, not necessarily completely determinate, but on average, it appears to be the case that there are some biological differences that have men tend one way and women tend another way. If that wasn't already completely obvious from whatever society you live in. But okay, let's see where we're going. Let's continue.
People have known this in the scientific community for at least 25 years. And it's been replicated in the last month 3 times in 3 separate samples, including in Science, which is the world's greatest scientific magazine by a large margin. And it isn't a small effect, it's a huge effect.
Excuse me, what does it mean? Does it mean that Scandinavian men and women are having more difficulties meeting each other, talking to each other, than other places?
No, not necessarily, but it does mean that there are reasons for differences in participation rates in different occupations that aren't a consequence of socialization. So, for example, this is especially true at the extremes. So, for example, on average, men are more interested in things and women are more interested in people. And that's actually the biggest difference we know of psychologically between men and women. And even though men and women are quite similar, all things considered, the extremes make a difference. So you imagine that in order to become an engineer, look, obviously not everyone becomes an engineer, you have to have a particular temperamental proclivity to become an engineer. You have to be extraordinarily interested in things rather than people. Well, most of those people are men. And if you want to become a nurse, well, then you have to be much more interested in people than you are in things. And most of those people are women. And so you get differences in occupational choice that are also, by the way, quite great in Scandinavia, especially in the case of engineering and nursing, that are mostly due to biological differences, and you cannot minimize that by social engineering. So, and it's not a bad thing. Like, look
at that face.
So, and it's not a bad thing. Like, look,
it's like she hears what he's saying, she kind of knows it's true, but nonetheless, she's now stopping listening and thinking about how she's going to answer. Just, okay.
One of the things you want to ask yourself is that what is the purpose of setting up a society that offers maximal equality of opportunity? And one of the answers is that you maximize people's free choice. And if you maximize free choice, then you also maximize differences in choice between people. And so you can't have both of those.
Before we move on to what's going to be Annie's response to Peterson, I just want to summarize briefly, just in continuation. So what we have here, his whole points of this whole discussion, is he says that it is evidently the case that in egalitarian societies, when the cultural differences are minimized, it gives way for the biological differences to sort of maximize or emerge or just show themselves. And what he said here in this most recent part is that that biological difference, that biological emergence of differentiation between the sexes, seems to be, on average, that men tend towards things and women tend towards people. Okay? So he's not prescribing that's the way it ought to be for everyone. He's simply saying, when we look at the world, this is the case.
But of course it will have differences in choice, of course, because we are human beings. But I can't see why it differs between me and Skavlan, for instance. But of course it differs in biological things, but not in choices, because I think more how we raise them, how we live, education, sort of culture, attitudes form a human being, whether or not they are a girl or a boy when they grow up. Mm-hmm. And if I raise my daughter to become a leader, to be self-confident, to have a high education, for instance, I think she will have a good platform to become a civil engineer, to become a CEO of a company, or to become a nurse.
Honestly, it's like almost every single person this man talks to, all of the great points he makes, everything he says, it's like it just goes over everybody he formally talks to's head. She's like, oh yes, well there's the biological, but sweeps that aside and she's like, but choice. Human choice, uninfluenced by anything but culture. It's like she just missed everything he said, all of the data he gave, all of the support for his claims, and just retained only her own position. Everything she's saying about how she wants to provide the environment for her son or daughter, well, specifically her daughter, I don't even think she says her son, to feel comfortable to be either, or to condition them in such a way that they feel comfortable to be either a nurse or a civil engineer if they just so desire in the future. It's like, yes, Jordan Peterson isn't against that. Like, what he's saying is he is for that. He is for equality of opportunity. What he is saying is that despite raising people to be however they want to be, which some countries have done more than others, that doesn't guarantee that they're going to choose professions or have preferences that are equally distributed cross-gender. It just doesn't happen. So it's like, what are you even arguing? Like, why are you here? What are you saying? Well, let's hear what Peterson has to say.
Well, that is what people who think that the differences between people who are primarily culturally constructed believe, but it's not what the evidence suggests.
Okay, we don't agree on that.
At least we know the audience isn't retarded.
Yes, the other thing I should say about this, what's necessary to understand about this is not a contentious issue among informed scientists. We've known this for 25 years. And so, and it's a perverse effect. No one expected it.
So there you have it. Even in Scandinavia, just as is Canada, the US, the UK, so on and so forth, far-left ideologues permeate in most places. And when I say that, I mean the sort of wave of political correctness about gender equality that feminism has brought on permeates everywhere to such a point where it's controversial or like incomprehensible for some people to understand common sense things that we've known collectively likely for centuries. That men are one biological organism, women are another biological organism. They converge in some areas, they differ in some areas, and just as they are individuals that are a part of larger groups, they tend to have differences because they're individuals, and they also tend to have differences because they belong to groups. They have differences that come from their group identities, and they have differences that come from their individual identities, and that is the way it is. So my only remaining question from this session is, how is this man so patient? Like, how do you deal with this? How do you go on tours of the world and just constantly have people be like, so you're saying